It's a major city for many initiatives, the PNRR. You are local officials with great responsibilities. And for a number of years, we have tried to create a social and cultural conditions to make sure that we can disseminate the knowledge between Strasbourg and Brussels. Angelo Consoli is the one who looks after the European director initiatives. We had so many plans, the Eurotunnel channel or canal, the Amsterdam master plan that Rotterdam, not Amsterdam, sorry. Thank you for correcting me. This is a master plan that spans 10 years. It started in 2015 and became operational as of 2016 with excellent results. 1 billion a year for 10 years. And Rotterdam, if you happen to follow this project on Google, YouTube, just click on this, and there has been a major turnaround in Rotterdam. Rotterdam is very famous throughout history, used to be one of the major ports for departures to the world of Indies. And, you know, after this, what happened was that they had to perform a requalification. Look at what has been done, you know, in Milan, starting from the Expo, as was the case in Turin. You know, they also adopted the Olympic Games 06 project. Milan experienced a major acceleration as of 2015, but the decision was made in 08. So in the meantime, the trip was quite major. Milan has obviously lots of facilities, very much focused on the Green New Deal. We're not here by any chance. We are with the counselor of our budget, municipal budget, who obviously is favoring our dialogue and conversation, thanks to Sergio Luciano. And so with that, I think, I mean, I felt like really thanking you. And I was born in Milan. I'm Milanese, by the way. I was born here. I was born here January 28th of 1968 in Via Guglielmo Silva. Think about that. I walked in this room when I was in my primary school. You know, they took us on a student trip. Quite an emotion, you know. This room, I only saw it when I was a kid. You know, so I was born here, pretty close to this place, facing the historical headquarters of the Alemania that no longer exists. When the third ring of San Siro didn't exist, I could see the second ring from my little room, bedroom. And so, admittedly, you know, being here as a grown-up, addressing from this chair, my God, makes me think of my father and my mother. They no longer are here. I wasn't very good at school, but, you know, addressing so many people right from this room is a great emotion. So I'll give the floor to our budget counselor to make sure that we can start our official meeting. Thank you very much.
Buonasera a tutte e tutti.
Good evening. Good evening, and hello, Mr. Rifkin.
The team of Milan is honored to host him here in Sala Alessi, hopefully in presence in the near future. And I wish to extend my greetings on behalf of the mayor, Giuseppe Sala, as well as thanks from the Milan community for the intellectual and civil commitment expressed in many studies and mobilization over the year in favor of social rights and environmental cause. As city administrators, one of our most pressing concerns, as Angelo said, in Milan, the second largest metropolitan area, is the green transition. This entails a set of policies necessary for environmental protection and a radical shift towards a new type of city, a sustainable city, decarbonized with zero emissions. There are no alternative choices to the ecological transition, although, as Mr. Rifkin rightly emphasizes, the replacement of fossil fuels with renewable energies will not be completed automatically. Indeed, there are many strong interests opposed to the decarbonization. If the challenging path towards sustainability passes, to quote again Mr. Rifkin, through the creation of macro-regional ecosystem, then the role of large metropolitan areas is central to this game. Cities must address the challenge of innovation and sustainability while ensuring growth, a sustainable growth. At the moment, the world's major urban areas indeed generate significant wealth, but this is particular. At the same time, they consume it. So at the same time, we generate wealth, and at the same time, we consume it. It's estimated that globally cities consume over 65% of energy and are responsible for over 70% of CO2 emissions. At the same time, they represent about 70% of the global GDP. This is the way we have to face off. In Europe, urban areas host 75% of the population and can significantly contribute to emission reduction, offering cleaner air, safer transportation, and less noise pollution. In this particular very framework, Milan that has an history of development, inclusion, and solidarity wants to play a role, and this administration has taken up the challenge launched by the polycrisis and adopted 4 strategic documents: the PGT, or Piano Territory Plan, Air and Climate Plan, Mobility Plan, and the Circular Economy. These political and administrative tools embrace all the ESG factors and set up challenging goals. They range from public transport electrification to the construction of schools and gyms, from large-scale urban reforestation projects to the energy requalification of buildings. Milano channeled a significant portion of its policy into emission reduction, fighting climate change, and technological innovation. Just to give you an example, 1/3 of our city budget is invested in mobility and public transportation, so almost €1 billion. Milan has joined also the European network called Cities, 100 climate neutral and smart cities by 2030, with the goal of decarbonization and to become a zero emission city. Concrete actions are being taken to support the city sustainability plans. These include a 4% reduction in land consumption in our Piano del Governo del Territorio, General Territorial Plan, and the establishment of 2 new urban parks by 2030. We aim to reduce CO2 emission by 45%. This is a goal set in our air and climate plan by 2030, and to become a carbon neutral city by 2050, contributing to containing the local temperature increase within 2 Celsius degrees by 2050 through urban cooling action and reducing the urban heat island effect. This is something that is particular to me because for one time the public sector is above the private sector, and we have replaced last year all the old polluting boilers in Milan in public offices. So we have no one old polluting boiler in our offices. We have been working on mobility, as I said, extending the metro and tram networks through the metropolitan area. We are now ending the activity for the M4, the Metropolitana 4, and the metro network will expand from 127 kilometers in 2020 to 195 kilometers by 2030. So we are now in aim to expand all our metro lines. Additionally, we have been recently introduced 350 new electric buses in order to electrify all the public transportation in Milan. We advocate for discouraging the use of private cars. This is always really discussed, and by increasing zone 30 areas, environmental zones, enhancing services as bike sharing, bike station, and car sharing. The municipality is promoting the transition to a circular economy, starting from waste sorting. At the moment, we are in a region of 63% of waste sorting and expected to exceed 75% by 2028. And also technological innovation is part of the municipality plans with digital transition. Thanks to the National Recovery Plan, our next generation EU, the municipality has obtained funding for 7 projects totaling 16 million euros. A significant portion of the action I've mentioned above are funded by the Next Generation EU. In Milan, we are talking about something in a region of 1 billion euros without delays in 94 infrastructure projects focused on mobility, transportation, education, and culture with a long-term vision. To conclude, Milano is not the only city. We discussed that yesterday afternoon with Mr. Rifkin. Is not the only city facing the challenge of transition. Also Bergamo, Bologna, Florence, Padua, Parma, Prato, Rome, and Turin are selected by the European Commission for the cities project. However, this alone is not sufficient, and as Mr. Rifkin emphasizes, actions need to be shared by larger geographic areas, moving in the same direction and proceeding decisively towards transition. To discuss something we just faced recently, Milano experienced a crisis where pollution limits were exceeded for several days. The city struggled with the poor air quality for days, and despite all the efforts and projects we have discussed, it's likely to face similar challenges in the near future. During the crisis, it became clear that Milan's direction is not aligned with that of the Lombardy region, unfortunately, which does not share our action plans and does not seem fully engaged in the challenge that concerns us all. At the present, there are no shared, coordinated, and targeted actions between the two entities regarding sustainability. It is clear that without a common ground to move forward on, the progress will be limited. This is all true for Milan, Lombardy, Italy, and the entire planet. But to conclude, I'm confident that today's discussion and working together will give us new helpful insight to build a different future. And I want to thank again Angelo and Antonio for choosing Milan as the venue for an initiative really important for all of us. Thank you very much.
Allora, buonasera a tutti.
Good evening to you all. Just a few words, not to take away too much time, apart from the thanks, obviously, which are very, heartily felt, because it's very important to seize these opportunities. But just 2 quick remarks. So we have a terrible challenge ahead of us, which is that of funding the transition. And I have to say that with an admirable historic awareness, Mario Draghi has spoken about this already. So there's the European Union that has sort of disappointed certain technical analyses in approaching this topic. He said something that's very simple at the last ECOFIN. So to celebrate the achievements, you need 400 billion a year for 20 years to achieve these objectives. And so these means a lot. 730 it would mean for Next Generation EU. So we're talking about, just a starter, really. So how should we fund this enormous amount of investments that would be necessary to achieve objectives that have already been approved, let's say, with a rather paradoxical attitude, because how can we achieve these objectives? Well, Mario Draghi said something interesting. He spoke about public investments and then also using private savings, using them and channeling towards these investments. These are 2 very interesting possibilities, but they have enormous problems. First of all, public investments are made impossible by the fledgling stability pact, which gives no margin for expansion. And so basically you should really develop a budget surplus. So we should be able to plant trees that produce coins, golden coins, and in this way it would be possible to fund the debt. Otherwise we're really not able to do this. So I would say it's quite unfeasible. And then private savings. Well, here, it's not easy to achieve this, certainly. Why am I saying that this is a challenge in the challenge, that of bringing European private savings, channeling them to these? Because the big seven of the American stock exchange capitalize almost as much as the Eurozone altogether, 13,000 billion. The Eurozone's GDP, which is 17,000 billion. And this only 7 companies. You see that the comparison is unsustainable between a colossal reality, which is that of the US, Germany, India, and Japan together. The market capitalization of the first 7 US stocks. Now, to think of that, European savers they're very careful when it comes to preserving money, but then obviously they don't have big alternatives. All they can do is just go through managed savings and seize the opportunities that these savings companies offer. So convincing all of us to put that money in Europe, will be really difficult. And the American view is very different from ours, because welfare is obviously different. It goes in pension funds that mainly invest in the stock exchange. It's different from us. So the problem of funding this transition is huge, and it hasn't been addressed really. It's as though we were talking about, stories here, about fairy tales. So, to hear a free mind as that of Jeremy Rifkin is really important. It's very interesting to see how he would see this, because we have important deadlines coming up. The US, as you know, have this enormous strength in their economy, very strong on a financial level, and they have a terrible leadership crisis instead. To think that to save for miracles, that the challenge will be between Biden and Trump. Everybody can think whatever they want, obviously, but who Trump is, and Biden obviously is also a person who is sort of declining for various reasons. And so 2 enormous parties that cannot express alternatives. And what about Europe? Well, Europe is this object that does not have a common economic policy, it does not have a common defense policy. So basically it's going through a very severe institutional crisis. So if all this is true, to set ambitious objectives on things which are essential for our survival. I don't want to be catastrophist. It's obvious that we have problems to be solved. But it's rather disconcerting. You're under the impression of being in a comedy of errors, really. So I think that the matter is very subtle. So all we can do is really listen to the words of an enlightened person who, in his career, has always had the ability of anticipating, of being ahead of the times, and really maybe seeing things that are outside of the mainstream. And so I'd say that it would be really interesting to listen to our guest speaker. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. It is an enormous honor for me to introduce Mr. Rifkin to you in this wonderful room and in front of a distinguished audience. I'd like to steal just a few seconds just to remind you that it's been 20 years that we have shared ideas, and that Jeremy's ideas have been influencing and have been a source of inspiration for European decision makers, with a book on hydrogen, for the economy of hydrogen, that determined Romano Prodi's decision, who was chairman of the European Commission, to start with a hydrogen fuel and cell technology platform. This is a platform to develop hydrogen technologies along the entire chain. It did well in some countries, it did a bit less well in other countries. Merkel and Germany invented the Nationalgeforschungsstoffen, which is basically the Hydrogen Association, investing 40 billion euro for the technologies, for the distributors of the hydrogens for fuel cells. Now, obviously, in the chain, they're very much in the van. And so in this also stems from the relationship existing between Jeremy Rifkin and Angela Merkel. And then Jeremy Rifkin wrote about the third industrial revolution. And I know that the Commission drew the inspiration from there to start the climate package. And so we started speaking about achieving more ambitious climate objectives with von der Leyen today, also as a consequence, or at least the von der Leyen of the first legislature. We're not sure about the second one. We don't know where we will end. We don't know what the Green Deal will end, but obviously based on Jeremy Rifkin's book, von der Leyen launched a very important challenge, which is a challenge that concerns, above all, the world and the role that Europe can play in terms of leadership in the world. In other areas of the world, in fact, such as China or other countries of the Mediterranean, they are beginning to look at Jeremy Rifkin's vision and ideas, especially that of a new approach to the environmental problems, seeing them as problems that also could allow us to redistribute wealth. It's not only a matter of saving the planet today, it's also a matter of moving towards technologies that are very labor intensive. And so having all of these new jobs that can be part of this vision that Jeremy Rifkin has. And obviously, this vision has been embraced in many different countries, especially European countries. Antonio was talking about Rotterdam before, and I'd like to remind you also about the Hauts-de-France. And this, for instance, this is a region that really changed its face. And the first industrial religion, the era of carbon, started off there. It was completely transformed thanks to the third industrial revolution plan and inspired by Jeremy. So before leaving the floor to Jeremy, we can see what a local administration can do by embracing Jeremy's, let's say, vision. And I would ask, please, to launch the video on the third industrial revolution in France.
On a time, 1,000 days ago, launched by the Regional Council and the Chamber of Commerce and helped by the renowned economist Jeremy Rifkin, a new idea for our future arose. This new project gathered political actors, companies, research scientists, civil society, associations, NGOs, banks, and financials. They called it the Third Industrial Revolution, codename Rev 3. It took place in Hauts-de-France, one of the best consumer zones in the world. 6 million inhabitants, 2 million of them less than 25 years old. 1,500 billion euros of purchasing power and 78 million consumers in a 300-kilometer radius. GDP, 154 billion euros. Number one in France for producing cars, trains, packaging. Number one in France for data storage, call centers, distance selling, digital entertainment. Number one in France for seafood processing agricultural exports, chemical industry, steel. It's an ideal place for logistics. Ports, the canal to the Seine, airports, highways, the Channel Tunnel. 9 prestigious universities and 40 renowned schools as well. Engineering, sciences, business and trade, arts, advertising, computer graphics. And of course, Hauts-de-France is a pleasant place in Europe because of the Hauts-de-France way of life. Hauts-de-France was the cradle of the first and the second industrial revolutions. There were coal mines, the spinning, and steel industries. We have to successfully enter into the third industrial revolution, the missing link between energetic transition and numeric transformation. Our challenge, make ideas come true. Here we have the best in research, storing energy for tomorrow's batteries, for mobile phones, computers, and even pacemakers. We are working on methods and tools for tomorrow's industry. In our world, 3D printers create new 3D printers. We set up places where companies, inventors, and schools can share and exchange. Our first and best resource, the capacity to change our point of view and move towards sustainable development. Less is more. We have conceived new building materials using natural products such as flax and straw, lightweight and with better thermal and sonic insulation. Now, everything we make must produce more energy than it will use. Nothing is lost. Everything is transformed. Steel industry, energy and heat provide central heating for thousands of local people. Imagine that one of the first web hosting providers in the world invents innovative solutions for cooling thousands of computers and server rooms, just using air and water. Sharing is another way of improving efficiency. We imagine new ways of transportation for people. With just one card, you can use either a bicycle or a car. Take the train, bus, metro, or tramway all over the territory. In Hauts-de-France, we produce 30% of French cars, electric cars too. Some for everyday use, some for pleasure. And we are building the network of recharging areas all over the region. Of course, the industry designing and producing these charging stations is local. By the way, transportation is not only for people. Consumer goods also need to find their way too, from all over the world to the heart of our great cities. We are thinking of the logistics tools of tomorrow. As we said, nothing is lost, everything is transformed. All right, let's head for a zero waste challenge. Another new activity, collecting waste cooking oil and transforming it into gold. Yes, that creates jobs too. A new company and less waste and pollution. Here we collect, sort and select old clothes. Social employment, new life for old objects. Can you imagine that your old blue jeans could be used to insulate your house? It's called the circular economy. Now, more than 1,000 days after it all began, we are creating new jobs and new dynamic companies, making money with efficient sustainability. Our new buildings produce more energy than they use. We live with a new model of development, and everybody can be a part of it. By changing our point of view, we simply stimulate a new way for a generation of economic wealth, including a better way for human health. Our third industrial revolution gives us the opportunity to transcend the values we are all proud of. Proximity, generosity, work, bravery. Once upon a time. By the way, it's better than a fairy tale. It's our future and our reality. Now, Europe has a new point of contact with the world. Come and take a look. Welcome to Hauts-de-France.
Ok. Questo era il video che spiegava quello che si è fatto in...
Okay, so this was the video that explained what had been done in the north of France. So at this point, he has switched into English.
and gives us his vision. So, Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Oh, buongiorno, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be with my friends in Italy. So thank you for the invitation today. I'm going to start on a somber note. I hope it'll end up being a liberating reflection. We can judge this later. The viruses are going to continue to keep coming. We're going to have more pandemics. And let me explain why. When my father was born in 1908, 84% of this planet was still wilderness, no human development. Today, only 19% of this planet is still wild. The rest has been developed by our species. And so what's happening is our viruses are now climate migrants. What do I mean by this? As the wilderness narrows, these viruses are hitching a ride on animals and getting closer and closer to our massive urban civilizations. We need to rewild this planet in real time. And now we have real-time climate change, no longer a theory. When I began working on this issue 40 years ago, we thought maybe, we weren't sure. Now it's here, real-time climate change. And I want to explain what climate change is all about, because it's never explained. And it only takes 1 minute. All of you, I know, are aware that we are seeing a dramatic change on the planet we live in. We're beginning to think we live on an alien planet that we do not comprehend, do not understand. We have these massive atmospheric rivers in the winter and huge snowfalls that we've never seen before. Then in the spring, we have flooding across every ecosystem in the world, destroying those ecosystems, taking the lives of our fellow creatures and our own human family, and wreaking havoc on our infrastructures. And after the floods, we have the droughts and the heat waves in the summer, parching the planet with temperatures of 110, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And then wildfires over millions and millions of acres of land. And then in the fall, we have the hurricanes and the typhoons. This planet is rewilding. And let me explain what this is all about. There are 4 spheres that manage this planet, that make life happen. The hydrosphere is the first mover. We are a water planet. We keep thinking we're a land planet, but we are a water planet. And so the hydrosphere determines the lithosphere. Without water, there's no soil, there's no plants, those animals, there's no nature. Without the hydrosphere, the waters, there's no atmosphere. The oceans, phytoplankton, create the oxygen for the atmosphere. And without the hydrosphere, there's no biosphere in which we can live. Now the waters of this planet are rebelling. For centuries, we've tried to sequester the waters and propertize them and commodify them, and dam them, and put them into artificial reservoirs. And now it's over. And here's why it's over. What's happening is for every 1 degree Celsius, the temperature goes up on this planet from climate change. Let me explain this. We have been spewing massive amounts of fossil fuels into this planet. We basically dug up the burial ground of a previous period of history, the Carboniferous era, and we took those dead remains of plant and animal life in the form of coal, oil, and natural gas, and we exhumed them and used them in order to build this civilization. The result is we spewed massive amounts of CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide into the atmosphere of our beautiful water planet. And here's why we have the problem. For every 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature from global warming emissions from fossil fuels, the atmosphere is actually sucking up 7% more precipitation from the ground. The heat on this planet, in the atmosphere, is forcing more evaporation and transpiration from the waters and the plants and the vegetation into the clouds. So we're getting more concentrated precipitation in the clouds and wild, extreme water events. The atmospheric rivers and massive snows in the winter, spring floods, summer droughts, heat waves, wildfires, fall hurricanes. The hydrosphere is now changing in dramatic ways. And here's our problem. We don't have a playbook for this, because it's the same set of assumptions that have given rise to this crisis that we're using to try to cure this crisis. It's not just about fossil fuels. It's about the entire age of progress over the last several centuries. It's how we relate to nature that's caused this crisis. It's how we educate our children. It's how we govern. It's how we organize our economic life. It's even our notion of selfhood, our concept of time and space. This is all part of what we call the Enlightenment, the age of progress. But it's those same set of assumptions that have given us now the sixth extinction event on this planet. We are in the sixth extinction event. The last one was 65 million years ago. This one is in the real time of today's babies. Our scientists are telling us we could lose over half the species to extinction in the lifetime of today's children. We will never hear them again, these species. We'll never see them again. They've been here for millions of years. So we now have to ask, where do we go from here? We're beginning to realize, and this is really an important thing to realize, we're beginning to realize that this planet is much more powerful than we ever thought. This water planet, the hydrosphere. In our little species, human beings, we're much smaller and not very significant in the future of how this planet evolves to some other new state. That's good news, because now we're becoming aware that we are simply one of many species that have to live and learn to adapt to the planet rather than having the planet adapt to us. All right? So I'm somewhat guardedly hopeful because of the Gen Zs, the young high school and college students. I watched how millions of the young people all around the world came out on the streets in these Friday for Future demonstrations. Millions of them in 141 countries. They did it for a couple of years. And they called for a global crisis emergency. I didn't really understand it till I was actually in Milan. This is true. And I sat down with several of these Gen Z Friday for Future leaders, these young leaders in high school and college, and it dawned on me what they were saying. This is not like any demonstrations in history. We've been demonstrating all through our history as a species. We love to demonstrate, protest our grievances. This one's different. This is the first time an entire generation of young people all over the world have gone out in the streets and they declared emergency, and they see themselves as an endangered species. And they see their fellow species as part of their family. This is an extraordinary shift in consciousness. So while we still have other identifications, we identify ideologically with our nation states, our religious affiliations, our cultural affiliations, our tribal affiliations, and whatever, our young people are saying above all of that, we are a species and our fellow creatures are part of the family. This is an eye-opening, awakening moment if we take advantage of it. So what's the situation right now? GDP is slowing all over the world. Productivity is declining. Our economists are forecasting 20 more years of slow productivity and growth. And let's do the math. While half the human race is better off in the last 200 years of the age of progress in the Industrial Revolution, granted, the other half of the human race, 45% of our human race, are no better off if they're making $5.50 a day. In fact, they're worse off. They have less water, they have less availability of food, less availability of shelter, etc. So while half the human race has done better, the other half has not benefited from the industrial age. The very rich have done really well. The 8 richest human beings in the world today, 8 human beings I'm talking about, Their combined wealth this morning equals the accumulated wealth of half the human beings living on Earth. The three richest human beings in my country today, right now, their combined wealth equals the accumulated wealth of the bottom half of the population of the United States. There is something so terribly wrong with the industrial age that's taken us to this point in time. So where do we go from here? I want to share a little anecdote with you. Back in 2001, Romano Prati came to Washington with a visit with me at the embassy. I knew I was in trouble because when we sat down, he held my hand for about a half hour. So I knew something was up. And he said, look, you spent 25, 30 years in the US. It's not moving forward. Come to Europe. We're going to make a revolution here, a third industrial revolution, as you say. I took him up on the offer. I got a lot of frequent flyer miles over the last 20 years and been privileged to work with the last four in the current presidency, the commission. And here's what we did. We started off on this journey in 2001, asking an anthropological question. How do the great paradigm shifts in history occur? If we know how they occur, maybe we can get a roadmap in the European Union and elsewhere on how to completely change the dynamic and create a completely new narrative and worldview so future generations can thrive in new ways. When we look back anthropologically at the great changes in history, we found a common denominator. That at a certain moment of time, across a society, four new technologies emerged, mostly serendipities, and they converge to create an infrastructure that fundamentally changes the way we organize our day-to-day life, our temporal spatial orientation, our governance, our economy, our education, our notions of selfhood. What are these four technologies that create the great paradigm shifts in infrastructure? Number one, new communication revolutions. Number two, new energy regimes. Number three, new modes of mobility and logistics. Number four, and the big one, new ways to organize water. When these four technology revolutions come together and solidify, they change our governance, our economy, our time and space, our narratives. We like to think that governance creates the infrastructures. No, the new technologies of those infrastructures determine the opportunities of what kind of governance would flow out of them, or economies, or cultures, or educational systems. And if any of this sounds like it's common sense, all of you studied biology in high school. Every organism on this planet has to have a means to communicate. It has to have some source of energy to survive thermodynamically. Number three, it has to have mobility, and even plants have to have movement and motility. And four, every species has to have water. So these infrastructure paradigm shifts are social organisms that bring large numbers of people together in all sorts of new ways to organize their day-to-day life. Simple, not in any of the textbooks up until recently. So let me give you an example. First industrial revolution, Britain, 19th century. Second industrial revolution, US, 20th century. So the Brits take us into this new infrastructure transformation. First of all, communication. No more manual print presses. Steam power printing, big leap forward. Then they introduced a telegraph system in the last half of the century in the British Isles. Instant communications. The new energy regime, coal. They had depleted the forest. They had to go to coal. The new mobility revolution, the railroads, locomotives. The new water revolution, the Brits became the first modern society after the fall of Rome, back in the old days, to put in water purification systems and modern sewer systems as well. This revolution took us to urban development because of the railroads, national markets, because of the communication, energy, and mobility. It took us to shareholding companies to finance all of this. And it took us to national governments, nation states. 20th century, second industrial revolution, the US, the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell. We connected the entire continent for communications, and we did it in the urban areas in 20 years. The energy revolution, we discovered cheap oil in Texas. We didn't have to rely on coal. The mobility revolution, Henry Ford put everyone in the internal combustion automobile, later for ocean traffic, air corridors. The water revolution, the great hydroelectric power dams in America and then around the world. This took us from urban to suburban development because of automobiles and road systems. It took us to globalization and global governing institutions like the World Bank, the OECD, the IMF, the UN. That second industrial revolution peaked. We know the date in the business community. It was in July 2008. Some of you remember this day. Oil hit a record $147 a barrel on world markets. The whole global economy shut down. That was the great collapse of the second industrial revolution. The financial collapse with subprime mortgages 60 days later, that was an aftershock. Why was this the moment of change? Because of $147 a barrel? Everything depends on fossil fuels, not just powering your automobile or heating your home, our cosmetics, our synthetic fiber, our pharmaceutical products, our packaging material. It's endless. So when the price of oil goes over 80 a barrel, all the other prices go up. So we are now in an end game. So I'll share a second anecdote. When Angela Merkel became the chancellor, she asked me to come to Germany in the first few weeks of her government to help her address the question of how to move Germany forward. The first question I asked the chancellor, Madam Chancellor, how are you going to bring the country forward when your businesses are plugged in to a second industrial revolution infrastructure of centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel nuclear power, internal combustion transport, and outmoded water mobility, and that whole infrastructure is now declining. So I said, you can have market reform and labor reform and new startup companies, but if they're plugged into that infrastructure, it's in its death mode. We began to introduce a more developed third industrial revolution infrastructure through the European Commission. And so here's where we stand today. The problem is this. Let me talk about the opportunity first. Here's what this third industrial revolution is all about. The communication revolution is the internet. We have 4.5 billion people on the planet connected with a little smartphone in their hand. And that smartphone has more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon. 4.5 billion people. This is a distributed revolution. Now that communication revolution, the communication internet, is converging with a second internet. And this is a electricity internet made up of solar and wind energies, which are now the cheapest energies in the world, thanks to what we've done in the EU. And so what's happening is we have now millions and millions and millions of people, just like we have billions of people with their little communication in their hand. We now have millions of people, farmers, business people, local communities that are generating their own solar and wind because the sun and the wind are everywhere. And you just have to grab them. And the fixed costs are now cheaper than all the other energies. The marginal cost near zero. The sun and the wind have never sent a bill. Uranium, coal, oil, and gas are pretty expensive to find, locate, purify, and send down the line. So we have now an energy internet in which we are seeing millions and soon hundreds of millions, actually are, and soon most of the human race generating their own solar and wind where they are, then sending it up on an electricity internet using the same big data and analytics and algorithms to send electricity, solar and wind, across regions, countries, within 10 years across oceans and time zones, a global energy internet. So if you have sun in one part of the world, grab it, send it to another part of the world. If you have wind at night somewhere else, grab it, send it to some other time zone. All of what I'm saying to you right now is actually happening. It's just beginning to scale. None of this is theoretical. Now, these two internets are converging with a third internet. It's a mobility internet made up of electric and fuel cell transport, powered by the solar and wind from the energy internet. And increasingly, the transport is autonomous: road, rail, water, and air. And it will be using the same big data, the same analytics, the same AI and algorithms that we use to create our communication and our energy, but now our mobility, we bring them all together. Now these three internets are converging with a fourth internet, the newest one, a water internet. All right. Now here's the problem with water. Everything we're dealing with now is about water. The fact is that the hydrosphere, and I'll explain this water, the hydrosphere is now rewilding, as I said, because of global warming. There's no way we're going to control it. There's no way we're going to be able to continue to privatize it, commodify it, sequester it, and use it and poison it. It's too big. We're too small. So we're going to have to adapt to the hydrosphere rather than the hydrosphere adapting to us. That's a pretty big change in history. So the question is, how do we begin to prepare for a water internet? Now, you know how sometimes, I don't have to tell you in Italy, because the Mediterranean ecoregion is the most in trouble of global warming of any landmass region in the world. In Italy, you have the droughts, you have the floods, and the Mediterranean, you have the wildfires. It's happening everywhere, correct? So we're not running out of water. People hear droughts, then floods, then droughts. We're not running out of water. The amount of water on this planet has stayed the same, all the molecules, for 4 billion years. The problem is the waters are changing when, where, and how much they deliver the waters. So for 10,000 years, we've had a reliable regime. We know the snow's in the winter, so it stores the water. Then in the springtime, when the weather gets better, the snow melts and you have the water for the crops to come in. And then in the fall, you can bring in your produce, etc. The problem is the waters are changing when, where, and how much. So the water internet, remember I said with the communication internet, we already have 4.5 billion people connected. And now with the energy internet, we're connecting with solar and wind. Everyone becomes part of the infrastructure if you have a solar or wind. We're connecting now with mobility if you have an electric vehicle. But now with water, we're looking at water internets, just starting. It's just about to scale. The market's there. That is, we are now looking at capturing the water when it falls. Every building in every region of Italy will have to have cisterns that are modern, state-of-the-art, digitally directed, so they can capture that water whenever it comes, hold it down in microgrids underneath the surface of where they live or work, and then using digital technology, distribute that water when they need it, when it gets dried out, when you have potential of too much heat. So we're going to have to begin to have distributed cisterns and microgrids, just like we have microgrids now for energy, for solar and wind. And then we're going to have Internet of Things, where you'll have edge data centers in every building. And let me explain how that works. It's quite fascinating, actually. You know, if you know how a infrastructure is organized, you know pretty much on how the goodies are divided, all right? So our first and second industrial revolution infrastructures, they were designed to be centralized because fossil fuels are centralized. Coal, oil, and gas are found in only a few places. They require huge militaries to secure them through history. We have fought many wars over oil. Right now, the last one we're talking about in Ukraine, but World War II, when France came in and took the Ruhr Valley from Germany, which was their coal, that helped precipitate the war. When the US stopped and Britain stopped shipments of oil from Asia into Japan, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor 4 months later. So water has always required a lot of military intervention or whatever. But what's happening now is that we're beginning to, as we see a shift to renewable energies, we're beginning to shift from geopolitics to biosphere politics. Now, I know this is hard to believe, because what we're seeing is a geopolitical zero-sum game going on. Every country is closing up, fighting every other country, creating alliances, and we seem to be falling apart. The reason that's happening is because we are in an end game for the industrial revolution that we have been in for 200 years. We have to have a new story. So while that's happening, something else is happening. We are shifting from geopolitics to biosphere politics. It's actually happening because climate events, the floods, the droughts, the wildfires, they don't give a crap about political boundaries. Climate events affect ecosystems, bioregions. So by necessity, what's happening is that various regions, you can do this across Italy, are starting to connect with other regions that share their common ecosystem in order to prepare, rescue, restore, adapt, and change the way they do business. So national governments aren't disappearing, but it's going to be the regions and the localities that begin to manage their common bioregions as ecosystems, as commons. None of this is theory. I'm going to give you some examples. The one place America's ahead, we have two major bioregions for 30 years. They're functioning. One is in the Cascadia Northwest, US and Canada, where 5 US states, 5 Canadian provinces and territories have come together across their common Cascadia ecosystem. They manage it together to make sure it's a commons, so they don't deplete it, because it's the future for their region. Impressive, huh? There's a second bioregional governance. It's in the Great Lakes. Now, this will surprise you, but the Great Lakes, those 5 lakes, they are 20% of all the remaining fresh water on the entire planet is in those lakes. That shows you we're in. And guess what? The average amount of water per capita on this planet, per person, is now half what it was 40 years ago. So every person on this planet has only half the availability they had then, and they didn't have much then. So you can understand the waters on the water planet are what we have to address and adapt to. So what's happening is we have, I work with the leadership of China as well, as you know, with the last 2 5-year plans. They have announced 8 ecoregions in China with 17 ministries involved. In Europe, you have one bioregion, Catalonia, along with the French region of Occitania and the Pyrenees and the Balearic Islands. They have a bioregional governance, which is bigger than half the EU member states. We need to move faster on bioregional governance. That doesn't mean we give up national governments, but metropolitan areas and regions, take Italy, have to begin to move across their common ecosystems. There is a different ecosystems in the north of Italy than in the midsection and the south. So these are some of the elements. And let me remind you, we did a plan for Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer. I worked on it with 1.5 years. It became the Build Back Better plan for America. So they're the 3rd country in the EU we work with, and China, now the US. And what we realized with this plan is that for every dollar of investment in this new infrastructure, this 3rd industrial revolution infrastructure, $3 returned in GDP. Always. Infrastructure is automatic. There's no loss. The problem is this. You go visit all the mayors around the world that have signed up for the climate accords, the Paris Climate Accords. There's 11,000 mayors, and most of them will show you their handful of electric buses, their bike paths, and their 20 LEED buildings. They're all pilots. Why do I say this? $11 trillion have flooded out of fossil fuels so far because it's all a stranded asset. It will never amortize out the coal, oil, and gas facilities because solar and wind are now cheaper, and it's most of the energy coming into the world. So what's happening is you have massive amounts of money that have flooded out of fossil fuels, 11 trillion, and nowhere to spend it. They want large-scale infrastructure projects in the major urban cities that can then move to the rural areas. It's led by pension funds. Pension funds, Karl Marx would never have understood pension funds. The workers are the main capitalists in the world, except they, up to now, have not managed their money. Someone else has for them. And what this means is there's $42 trillion in pension funds that are getting out, and they're saying, where are the scale projects in the major urban areas, extending to their bioregion urban areas around the world? We're ready to go. I meet with them every week. Then there's the insurance companies. They're 22 trillion in assets. They say the same thing to me. We're ready for scale projects. We need cities to step forward and join with other cities and join with their common ecosystem so we can begin to scale up the infrastructure that I'm talking with you about today. Communication internet, energy internet, mobility internet, water internet, the shift to 3D printed infrastructure in buildings that are passive and zero emission. It's endless, the list. The technology is there. These are some of the things that we need to negotiate. I want to turn to something that's even more important. Why isn't this being done? That's a big question. Why isn't this being done? Some of it is ready. I'm going to give you an example. You know, Italy, I've spent a lot of time in Italy. You have great cooperatives. You know how to do cooperatives, which is what commons governance is all about. You have great trade unions there. You have cooperatives there. You have high-tech, small and medium-sized enterprises. You're the 8th largest economy in the world. So what's slowing us down? Well, I think we got to see the new technology that we're talking about. In the Age of Resilience, the book I put out last year, we mentioned quite a bit of this. But let's take an example. We are moving from globalization to glocalization, from globalization to globalization in real time. Why? Our industrial infrastructure is changing. The first two industrial revolutions were what we call subtractive manufacturing. You make a product, but then you have to, some of the product doesn't go into the final product, so you have waste. So if you're building a building, some of the bricks aren't used, some of the glass isn't used, some of the scaffolding isn't used, because you have to subtract. It's the same with making a car or anything else. Now we've got something new called additive manufacturing, 3D printing. It's totally different industrial model, starting to scale. And that means, I'll give you an example. You have an architect named Cucinella in Italy, but there are many of them doing this, Cucinella. So what he can do is you take a feedstock. They're using cement, but it's too much CO2. So he took clay, which is what buildings were built with for a long time in history. So the software with 3D printing heats up the clay. Then the software informs the clay how to pour out an entire building. You can do it in 1, 2, or 3 days. All right. It's zero emission. It is resilient to climate events. And some of it can be recycled. And it's cheap. But how does that change economics? It means it favors high-tech SMEs in cooperatives. I'll tell you why. It's glocalization, not globalization. Here's how it works. You can now go from a seller-buyer market with this new infrastructure technology. You can go from a seller-buyer market to a provider-user network. And if Cucinella wants to, he can set up a licensing agreement so that he can send the instructions for those buildings to a developer in the Philippines at near zero marginal cost on his cell phone, the software instructions. And that developer, she can develop as many buildings as she wants and pay a fee and a license. This is a totally different economic system. It's not a seller-buyer market. It's a provider-user network. They're using 3D printing for wind turbines and bridges and all sorts of things. Unless you think this is not happening, the UAE has just committed that 25% of its buildings will be 3D printed by 2030. Saudi Arabia has just committed $500 billion to make the transition in 3D printing. These are the possibilities as we move from a dying second industrial revolution to an emerging third, from globalization to glocalization, from geopolitics to biosphere politics. So now I want to shift gears. I want to talk about something very hopeful, because I believe that Italy's got all the potential. I've spent 30 years, some of you know I've visited you in all your regions. Nobody has more potential culturally than Italy. So how do we proceed with this? I want to move to a different completely different part of the narrative. We have a new project. I am sitting looking out my window here at the National Institutes of Health. It's 2.5 blocks away. They have a new project that I want you to share what they're doing with everyone you know, because it's going to change your whole narrative from fright to hope. The NIH has now got a new project called the Human Microbiome Project. And now the EU has joined, and some other countries like Japan and Korea. And what they're telling us, all the great scientists, is that each one of us today that's in this conversation here this morning, we are each an ecosystem, not a metaphor. We are literally an ecosystem. The human body is an ecosystem. What are they saying? Our body is taking in elements from the hydrosphere, the waters, the lithosphere, the minerals, the minerals and the elements, taking in oxygen from the atmosphere at every moment into our cells, our tissues, our organs. Then those atoms go somewhere else. They don't disappear. The human skeleton is totally changed, completely new skeleton every 10 years. People don't know that. Totally new, all the bones. Your stomach cells are new every year. I'm sorry, your liver, your stomach cells every month. And what they're saying is, it's even more interesting. We're not alone in our body. We talk about the 20,000 genes in our body. There are millions of other genes that belong to other creatures living in our body. The protists, the fungi, the bacteria, the viruses, it's endless. Only 44% of the cells in our body are ours. The others belong to these other creatures. And what they're saying is we are each a semi-permeable membrane, bringing in the patterns and processes of the atmosphere, the biosphere, the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, which is the big mover, and goes somewhere else. Why is this hopeful? We don't have to be frightened of nature. We can stop with the idea that we are in command. The book of Genesis, you shall have, Adam, dominion over the earth. No. We can learn to be a good player. We can learn that we are part of something bigger that makes us even more engaged with the planet we live in. So instead of trying to adapt the planet to us, especially the hydrosphere, we adapt ourselves to the planet. This is a very hopeful sign for young people who are retreating behind the screens. We're going to need a virtual world part of the time, but we're also going to have to be out in the physical world. And I want to share one other very promising thing with you, in which you will pass along to your friends. The Smithsonian Institution, many of you have visited our great museums in Washington. The Smithsonian Institution engaged with New York University in a really interesting study. They asked, how do human beings survive? This teeny little creature with 2 little legs, not very strong. How did we survive? The old story that you and I grew up on is the good weather started about 10,000 years ago, no more ice age. We settled down from nomadic life to agriculture, pastoralization, hydraulic civilization, and here's where we are today, an extinction event. And they said, well, how did this all happen? Did we just come out of the Rift Valley of Africa and then go across the world? Well, here's what they did. They went back and they looked in the geological record. And what they found shocked them, the researchers. It turned out that hominids, our forebears, started to emerge 800,000 years ago. Later, Neanderthals, 350,000 years ago. Then Homo sapiens, 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. We still have Neanderthal genes, many of us, in our blood, in our DNA. And during that 800,000 years, what they found in the geological record, the most dramatic changes in extreme climates in much of world history. Because the Earth tilts, sometimes closer to the sun, sometimes further away. There was a tilt of the sun, of the Earth, 800,000 years ago, and it started a series of changes where you would have 100,000 years of ice age, 10,000 years warming. 100,000 years of ice age, 10,000 years warming. 100,000 years of ice age, 10,000 years of warming. How the hell did our little creature species survive that? Really extreme climate changes like we're facing now. You know what their conclusion was? Pretty simple. We have the biggest brain. We are able to have knowledge so we can share what we learn and pass it on and learn from it, number 2. 3, we have an opposable thumb and lengthy digits that allow us to be homo faber. We can make tools for ourselves better than the other creatures. Number 4, this is what I would argue, we have empathy in our neural circuitry. It's not just some idea. There were a few other creatures we think have it, elephants, dolphins. We're not sure about dogs. Usually if you can recognize your face in a mirror, then you're a creature that has it. So we have empathy in our neural circuitries. And it was an Italian scientist that discovered the mirror neurons. It was an Italian scientist, all right, in the 1990s, the empathy neurons. This allows us to cooperate. So while we fight each other and occasionally kill each other, we are by nature a cooperative species. Sometimes for good times and sometimes it collapses. So given all this, these are hopeful signs, but this is a very dramatically changing world that we are moving into. We need to begin to move forward. And so I would like to, I think, go in the last few minutes to talk about where you're going to get the money. The pension funds, the insurance funds, green banks, green bonds. This can happen. The question for Italy, the cities need to lead this. The cities need to lead this and begin. You're getting, I think it's, you're getting 200 billion euros from the EU. I mean, I know because I was engaged with them when we created the third industrial revolution. Here's the theme, third industrial revolution, digital, green Europe. And I work with Mayor Sefcovic and the commissioners with that. You're getting 200 billion euros. I think half of that, 200 go, and that's the most that's ever been given out. That's bigger than the Marshall Plan. And half of that 200 billion is going to the cities and the regions, right? But up to now, and I'm going to be blunt, it's all been about a little project here and a little project there that has very little to do in most of the cities and regions with the way the money was designed to be used. And if it continues in that way for the next 24 months, you're probably going to have to give most of it back. That would be, there will be never a second chance. Try to imagine how you will ever have this opportunity again at this cusp. So as I've been thinking about this, the cities now have to come together and their regions and take responsibility. All the technologies I'm mentioning here are now market-wise. Everything I've mentioned to you right now in the last hour, they're here. You have the technical expertise at your universities and your keystone industries and your cooperatives. You have all of what you need, but you have to think in terms of an infrastructure revolution. You know, in the second industrial revolution infrastructure, let me share this. How did they do this? I'm going to share with you the first and second industrial revolutions in the US. After the Civil War in 1865, the entire economy was in shambles. Families killing their relatives, north and south. It was terrible. What did they do? They created an infrastructure paradigm shift along those 4 technologies I mentioned. The communication revolution, they put a telegraph system across the entire continent of the United States. They did it in less than 30 years. The energy revolution, they put coal and dispatched it across all the regions. The mobility revolution, they put the railroads, Continental Railroad, across the entire US frontier, the whole continent. The water revolution, they began to introduce the first of the canals and dams. Then they ceded 10% of the public land to immigrants. Then they established public universities across the United States. They did it in 30 years. The second industrial revolution took 25 because they thought big change narrative. A new generation of political leaders and academics and business leaders, et cetera. So what did they do? In the second industrial revolution, they put the telephone across the whole country, instant communication. The energy revolution, oil. The mobility revolution, the automobile. They went to suburban to urban building stock, and when they did this all in 25 years, because you not only had to put out an automobile, you had to have roads. You not only had to have roads, you had to have pipelines to get the gasoline to the cars to go on the roads. And then you have to have electricity in order to bring suburban buildings out. They put it all together. The rural areas took longer, but the rural areas did it within the next 20 years. This can be done tomorrow morning. It takes new political will. It means it starts with the mayors of the big cities in Italy and your regional presidents of your regions, and they're very competent. But you have to get away from the idea that it's business as usual. We are in an extinction event. This is the climate's going to continue to deteriorate. I spend a lot of time each month with business leaders, and I don't hear them talking about the age of progress. I never hear that term. They're all talking about the age of resilience. They just don't know what it is, a lot of folks. And I don't hear anyone talking about efficiency. They're talking about adaptivity. What we need to begin to do is we've got to have the first movers take this forward. If this collapses in Italy, my God, I don't know what's going to happen in the next European Commission, because the old school political leadership and others are continuing to fight a zero-sum game, holding up and trying to be able to fend off a changing planet and changing circumstances. It's not going to win. We need a new generation of thinking among political leaders. We need them to work with our academics across the universities in Italy. We need the regions to come together and say, what do we need to make this transformation happen? Let me show you one last story that has to do with the regional areas. In about 20-some years ago, the state of Texas came to me, San Antonio, 6th largest U.S. city. And they said, can you do an infrastructure plan with us? I said, we can do it together. So they were looking at both nuclear power. They had 2 new nuclear power plants that they had already invested in from Japan, and they were looking at wind. So our global team, we said, look, you could do either, but you may have a cost overrun with the wind. I mean, with the nuclear, and it could be billions. And if your utility, your public utility, is the biggest in the country, and it's 1/3 of the revenue of your city. What happened is, at the time, they were $4 billion overrun. They found out. They took $1 billion loss. We got them into wind. And now wind, in the US, #1, in the world, #5. And guess what? It's the farmers and ranchers who are putting in all the solar and wind. They're staying on their farms. They're staying on their ranches because they have wind technology that allows them to do that revenue. And as long as you maintain the environment so it's not harmed, this is the way to move to show the advantages of urban and rural coming together. This can be done. So I think those are kind of the main principles, but I would like to share you a couple of last thoughts. When we began to see this third industrial revolution emerge, it started to do things that we never expected. Honestly, we started to see it morph and create its own dynamic that we had not anticipated: communication, energy, mobility, logistics, water, the built environment. And so this is a list of what our folks have gotten together and taken a look at. What we're seeing now is this third industrial revolution is the beginning of the first age of resilience infrastructure and the last of the industrial revolutions. So here's what we've seen as this has begun to move out into the regions. We're seeing efficiency being balanced by adaptivity. That's a totally different value. In nature, there's no such thing as efficiency. It's always adaptivity, adapting moment to moment to the changes in the planet around us. We're seeing a shift, a partial shift from growth to flourishing. There's no such thing as growth in nature. It's about flourishing, either flourish or not. We always talk about finance capital, but the real capital is ecological capital. Net primary production, photosynthesis determines all the wealth that we then generate. We talk about GDP, but quality of life indicators determine the good life. We talk about a hyper-consumption, but the young people, they're starting to think about eco-stewardship. We talk about negative externalities, but as you mentioned earlier before I came on, you're talking on circularity, which is what nature does. We're talking about balancing seller-buyer markets with provider-user networks. We're talking about geopolitics to biosphere politics. We're shifting from globalization to localization. We're making a shift from partial intellectual property rights, they're still here, but we're doing a lot of open source sharing of knowledge. It's quicker and it builds networks. Thinking of networks, instead of zero-sum games, the new infrastructure is creating network effects. The more everyone's in a network, the more everyone benefits from that commons. And so finally, the shift, partial shift from geopolitics to biosphere politics. What I'm saying, none of this is some theory, some academic idea. Everything I'm saying to you is actually there, scaling, the market's there. What we need now is political will. So my hope here, and we can open it up to a lot of good conversation here, if now, not now, when? You got to put together a paradigmic infrastructure transformation, taking some of the projects you've already okayed that are good and place them within this larger dynamic of infrastructure shift. This is what we've laid out with the EU, with China, the Build Back Better plan in the US. And I'd end with this last thought. You saw that little film clip on Haute de France, right? Earlier, before I came on. So I want to share this last little thing with you. It's kind of interesting. So Haute de France, the industrial region of France, 10% of the population. We have done many regions around the world, but this one was interesting. It's a Rust Belt, but it's the major industrial region. It's the region of Marie Le Pen and President Macron, okay? So the premier of the region at the time was a socialist. This was about 12 years ago. He said, will you do a plan for our region? I said, absolutely not. He said, why? It's a waste of your time and your money and my time. And he said, why? I said, because I'm not a consulting company. If a consulting company makes a plan, it generally ends up in a pilot project and a minister puts out a press release and the politicians in power say, see, we did something good and we're still not making the shift. But what I said to the premier, if you go back to your region and you get a hold of all of the mayors come together across all the political parties, and you bring together all the chambers of commerce and all the industry and trade associations, and you bring together all the civil society organizations and all 26-year universities and all several hundred-year high schools, and they all want to come on board and they make the plan, we will help them with the technology, but they make the plan, we will join you. And you know what? Usually they never come back. I mean, they really don't come back. This guy actually came back months and months later, said everybody's lined up. They made the plan. We spent 10 years with them. They created thousands and thousands of projects and new tech parks. They trained the grandchildren of coal miners to retrofit buildings and put in solar and wind technology and get a good wage. It isn't rocket science. They just decided that their regions were collapsing. They had to do something, and they came together across political lines. The socialist premier, he then lost the next election to a Republican center-right and continued the project. Why? Because all the regions were involved. So this isn't rocket science. Any region can do this. We'd love for you to come to Haute de France. We've done other regions, but they really did it. So if you have that esprit de corps where you can bring together your great cities, you're the oldest urban civilization in history in Italy. You've got the cooperatives, you got the trade unions, got the industry associations, you got the universities. So my hope is make this day one, and whether you work with us or not, but make this day one to be able to take those next 24 months and see those as the most important 24 months of the history of Italy, at least since World War II. Because if you fail, those funds won't be here again. If you succeed and you can come together with the mayors across these urban areas and their regional premiers, who are very good people, I've been in a lot of the regions, and began to develop your ideas on how this plan should move forward, your best talent at the universities and the industries, you can do this. And there, you know, Italy, it was Spinelli who gave us the EU moment, Mr. Spinelli. He brought us the European Union. I'm a big fan of the European dream. And now Italy has to bring us the next part of that European dream, the Spinelli moment. It's now, it's ready, the market's there. So I'm hopeful that this can be done. And now I leave it to you and we have some conversation. Thank you so much for giving me some time. I really do appreciate it. I'm not hearing from that end. There's
They're
no
all,
sound.
there's a huge round of applause. Can you hear me?
No, yeah, I can't, now I
Yeah.
can. It could be
You
on.
couldn't hear the room. Yes, they were all applauding. They were all clapping their hands.
They should be clapping their hands for themselves, because they know what to do.
Okay, Jeremy, thank you very much for this inspiring.
You need to be louder.
Jeremy, can you hear me?
Now I can, yeah.
Okay, thank you from all of us for these very inspiring thoughts. We have a few questions, and I'll just give the floor now to Mr. Magnini from the newspaper Sole 24 Ore to ask to have the first Q&A in this session.
Hello, Professor Rifkin. Pleased to meet you. Alberto Magnani, actually, but it's fine as well. I've just got a couple of questions. The first one is the European Commission, led by Ursula von der Leyen, started the term with an ambitious, courageous plan of the so-called Green New Deal. But right now, it seems that they are kind of getting backward, because there are several issues with the industries. Industries are lobbying hard, are pushing hard. There are some issues with enterprises, with the consumers that sometimes are pushing to say, no, we are not ready to this transition, sorry. And so the European Commission seems to be a little more shy about its goals and about its ambitions in terms of green transition. So don't you think that there is the risk that European Commission can lag behind the international players for the Green Deal if there is no political will? And my second question is related to a specific area, which is Africa. Africa can have a tremendous opportunity right now, for instance, in terms of renewable energies, renewable sources, and also in terms of the so-called human capital. But there are some countries still in the continent that state we do have the chance to grow thanks to, for instance, oil or gas. I'm thinking of Nigeria, I'm thinking of Uganda, or Mozambique. And so we don't want right now to be compliant with the international green agenda, because Western countries got rich thanks to those kind of resources. And so right now we don't want to be obliged to fulfill to these specific international goals. So I also would like to have your opinion about this specific situation, and also on how about Africa can turn into a powerful asset also for the green revolution. Thanks a lot.
Well, that's an important question. And so let me share this little anecdote. Many years ago, I was sitting down with Mr. Yamkela, who was head of the United Nations Industrial Foundation. And we had a moment of an embarrassing moment of realization. And here's what it was. We were talking about Africa, India, Southeast Asia. We were talking about the less developed countries of the world who were suffering. And we came to the realization that their liability was their asset. Why? Why in these poorest countries is their liability their asset? They have no infrastructure for this. No infrastructure. It's easier to build infrastructure from scratch and move it quickly so that you have an operational platform. It's much more difficult to take an already existing infrastructure with old codes, old regulations, old standards, and political interest and business interests that want to defend it. So we realized that the not developed countries can leapfrog because they don't have anything stopping them. What I would say to you is that solar and wind, there may be political interest stalling this, but they will not succeed. It may be they won't be quick enough to move to solar and wind, but let me tell you, they won't amortize out. I've been dealing with energy for a long time. The levelized cost of solar and wind dipped below the cost of nuclear, uranium, coal, oil, and gas in 2019. What does that mean? That means that 30 years of amortization, they will never pay back the amount of money they put up for their gas-fired power plants and nuclear power plants. They know this, but the CEOs continue to do it with local politicians because they only care about the next 2 years of their presidency of their company. It's a stranded asset. And so these are not statistics from me. The International Energy Agency has said, they oversee all energy on the planet. They have said, and they've been very mainstream for a long time, they announced last year that coal plateaus and declines by the late 20s in the Age of Resilience. I'm sorry, in the Green New Deal book, I put that on the front page cover. And then about 2 years later, they said it was happening. So coal peaks and declines in the late 20s. And then natural gas declines around 2030, 2031. It's over. So they're putting money into projects that will never amortize out. The interesting thing about solar and wind is it changes the dynamics. You know, the first and second industrial revolution infrastructures were designed to be centralized because fossil fuels are so expensive and you need big military. You need national governments protecting them. But the third industrial revolution is totally distributed. If you own a solar panel and you send power back to the grid, you're in the infrastructure. That's millions of people. Pretty soon, hundreds of millions. Eventually, billions of people are the infrastructure where they collect the sun and the wind and the geothermal. If you have an electric vehicle, you're the infrastructure. You can send that electricity back to the grid and get paid for it. If you have an edge data center that allows you to set up your own communication links across communities without having to rely on Meta or the other big guys, you're the infrastructure. So it goes on and on. So what we're seeing is that the first and second industrial revolution infrastructure was centralized to create vertically integrated economies of scale to return revenue. The third industrial revolution is designed to be distributed. And I think Berners-Lee, who founded the World Wide Web, I think he'll get the last laugh. He said, I want to build a communication internet so that everyone on the periphery can engage directly, no referee at the center. Now, that didn't exactly happen the way he wanted because the first generation, Dell, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Apple, they created centralized, right? They won't be here in 40 years from now. I'm going to tell you that. Why? Too much data. We are creating a global brain with GPS and Europe has its own, Japan, all these satellites, and then we're creating sensors across our wild environments, our factories and our homes, our businesses, so we can connect each of us with the world around us, right? So what's happening is that the first generation of these businesses were centralized, but guess what? It's now called the latency factor. This is what people in the industry that I work with know. What's happening is we have so much damn data being collected by all of these sensors all over the world. If it's too much data for big centralized data companies of these big corporate giants. If you have an autonomous vehicle about to crash and you send that data back to one of those big data centers, it's too slow. It's called the latency factor. So edge data centers are now coming in where people right now, small businesses, cooperatives, neighborhoods, communities, they're starting to connect locally because then you are closer to the action and you can actually make the system work. This is something we know in the industry. So there are there's a lot of internal information that folks like us work on, but it doesn't get out to the public. So I think we're going to see much more distributed infrastructure. Some big companies will survive, and I work with them. They're in our group, but they will be aggregators working side by side with cooperatives and high-tech SMEs in ecosystems in a localized, more distributed world. It's the nature of the economic system. The centralized does not work. This is not decentralized, it's distributed. And also with climate events, you have to be distributed, because if you have a climate disaster and there's no water flowing, there's no energy moving, etc., what do? With the solar and wind, you can go right off the main grid in like a moment. It costs nothing, and you can distribute and send the solar and wind where you are in your local region until the big system comes back. All right. It's the same with water. We're scared to death about water events. Are we seeing various interests trying to seek out a way to destroy our infrastructure for water? Then 3-4 days without water, this is a problem. That's what's happening in Gaza right now. But so we need to be able to have distributed water systems. So if there's a cyber terrorist attack across our water system, or there's a climate event, we can immediately go off and then reassemble, and the technology is there to do it within a couple of minutes. So your local cisterns begin to hold and distribute locally until the main grid goes back. All of the technologies I'm talking about there are ready for the market. It's political will now. Do you stay in the old geopolitics? Do your agricultural regions just want to stick around for having another a movie theater or something like that? No. But we have to work with the rural regions to show them all the opportunities and how we change our approach to farming, how we change our approach to the energy we use, et cetera. And we're not at the stage where we're guessing. We're at the stage where we know it can be done. So I think those are the two things. And last thing I'd say about the developing countries. You remember a number of years ago when India, the entire electricity grid went out? No electricity for all of India, remember? It was all gone. The whole system, centralized, broke down. The rural regions didn't, because women, new generation, created electricity cooperatives where they hooked up solar in their villages with little batteries so they could have light and ever. And all of those rural regions where they had cooperatives, mainly by women, electricity cooperatives, their electricity stayed on. It was distributed. So, someone else?
Caro professor Rifkin, le volevo
Dear Professor Rifkin, I just wanted to tell you that here in this room, we have 7 professors from 7 universities who have been asked by the dean, let's say, to participate at these meetings. They come from Palermo, Naples, even from Milan, Rome, and we have here in attendance also Professor Giovanni Ferri. And you had a very pleasant meeting, a fantastic briefing before your Lectio Magistralis at LUMSA in October 2018, with 250 university students attending. He is also here. So I don't know if somebody has a question, or maybe, yeah, Professor Ferri himself is very, is very eager to ask you a question. Thank you.
Professor Rifkin, thank you very much, Jeremy. It was really impressive what you communicated to us. And I had to change my question. So changing the frame of mind is what you are constantly teaching us, innovating from one to another. And I want just to mention 2 points that are connecting to what you said to us. The first thing is that we need to update our way to evaluate the things, even in the transition. We are in this transition, and you cited the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience. And of course, it is a dramatic opportunity for Italy, for many other countries in Europe, but particularly for Italy. And yet, you may have noticed that we fall back on the mainstream view that we evaluate the contribution of the end of this national plan, which should be about resilience, in terms of GDP.
Yeah.
And this is a terrible mistake. It is a nonsense. So how do we step out of that? And secondly, changing the frame of mind is important, maybe because, I mean, I had an image in front of me when you were talking about how these local situations are becoming a way of life or death for many people, many individuals in the world, many communities in the world. And then the whole concept of the ability to insure against events is disappearing probably across the world, as the nature of the events is the statistics that we collected from the past are no longer a good guidance for the future and for the present. So changing the frame of mind is a process of the adaptivity that you mentioned, because if we do not pursue changing our frame of mind, it will be expelled and we are going to quicken our extinction. Thank you very much.
Totally agree with you, and nice to see you again. There's a huge responsibility here of the universities. You have the intellectual talent across your universities in Italy to play them a major role here in this. I've been having long conversations over the last few years with Livio De Santoli over at Sapienza and other universities. We need to change pedagogy and curriculum. We need to understand that our approach in the various academic disciplines has been based on the Enlightenment ideas, the Age of Progress ideas. All of that has taken us to where we are today and deeply responsible for the crisis we're in. I mean, you can't say we had the Enlightenment, the Age of Progress, modern industrial capitalism and socialism that went with us, and somehow none of that is to blame for what we are, all right? So we need a completely new narrative. Every period of history has new narratives, and it will be the responsibility of the university. So let me just share one part of this, which you know better than I do. We are so siloed in our academic disciplines that we can't even talk with each other and think more holistically about a new narrative. We need, so our modern science is based on a Platonic tradition, and it's based on deductive and inductive reasoning. As Francis Bacon that said, man does not belong to earth, the earth belongs to man. That's Francis Bacon, the founder of modern science. And he was a big fan of what he called deductive reasoning. Plato was inductive, where we become an observer and detach, because we're the masters. Then we learn to find the secrets of the four spheres. We pry the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, the atmosphere, the biosphere, and we get the secrets of how they operate. And then we take those spheres and we adapt them to us at higher speeds and shorter time intervals. It's called efficiency. Then we wonder why we have depleted the planet, all right? Nature doesn't work by efficiency. That's kind of a value from the Enlightenment to here. It's not nature. In nature, it's all about adaptivity. In other words, all of our internal biological clocks in our cells, our tissues, our organs, and every creature are continually adapting moment to moment to all the patterns and processes and changes going on around us. The idea that we could capture the planetary spheres, especially the hydrosphere, for our own use, now we realize, hey, the hydrosphere is going in another direction. So what I would say is we need to move to adaptive thinking. And as you know, abductive thinking, abductive thinking, as you know, the pragmatist scientists got it right. Dewey and Mead and Pierce in the early 20th century. They said, look, this planet's much bigger and it's always changing. It's the butterfly effect. The patterns are moving every moment. So instead of trying to pry the whole planet's secrets just so we can maintain our short-term benefits, what we need to do is adapt moment to moment to where the planet's taking us. That means a new science, and it's called complex, adaptive, social, ecological systems modeling. What it really means is we have to cross the disciplines. We need to be able to open up the academic departments. We need to be able to make sure that our young people are learning different approaches, all of which have some benefit academically, so we can create a new worldview and a new narrative and not isolate it out to specific places. So what I would say to you is this, what I'm asking Italy to do will require the universities. It will require your graduate schools. It will require the talent there that can help the cities and the regions make this transformation. Think of it as an emergency situation, 24 months, or this money's going back, what I understand. You'll never get another opportunity. Bring together the universities. Bring together the presidents and the proctors. Begin to look at a lot of you are starting to do interdisciplinary studies, the new approaches to the various academic disciplines. Make this an urgent emergency over the next 6 months, and let's see if this can be done. Does that make sense? Am I still on there? Hello?
Yes. Okay. Now we have Vincenzo Farago, who wants to ask you a question from the University of Naples.
Good afternoon, or better good morning, Professor Rifkin. Thank you very much for your inspiring talk, and thank also to the colleague, the previous colleague, for his question, because his question and your answer give me the chance to put on the floor another concept. First of all, I would like to tell you a few words about my role at University of Naples Federico the King II, because I am responsible of a task force, a sort of special unit we realized to combine both hard and soft sciences. That is according to your in accordance with your last comment, task force in circular economy, with the objective of put together and strengthen the efforts on this revolution that we have to realize. Well, to go to the two small questions I would like to ask you. The first one is in a logic, in a priority order, is about the ethics. Ethics, yeah. Etica in Italian, because even if I am a chemist, even if I've been working for 20, more or less 20 years in the field of chemical transformations, biochemical transformations, with the aim of improving the environmental balance on the earth, I think that the big problem we have is ethical problem. And because if we think that we are the owner of the planet, if we think that everything should circulate around only one man or few men that are more richer than the others, I think that the matter is of ethical and also spiritual problem, as you and Pope have reminded several times to us. Because first of all, the money is something that flows from one to another person. Nobody has in the whole life owns money for forever, always. So money flows. Money is sort of energy that flows. And if we think that we own stably and always something, we are in a not good direction. The good direction is the ethical one, because as you have reminded since a long time, everything is common. Well, and starting from this, or reminding this, I think that we should link our efforts, we as professors of different disciplines, because we that work in the field of art sciences need the efforts of our colleagues of human sciences to change the cultural approach, as the colleague before told. The other aspect concerns, second comment questions concerns the circular economy, because that is also related in some way to the first my question, because circular economy means to transform wastes in resources, and we are wasting resources and also money. In south of Italy, we had a very big loss of resources that were put in the PNRR, in the special area for the south, that was planned due to our higher needs, and we wasted. So for me, this is an acceptable situation in a so dramatic period where we are going towards the extinction. We think to be owner of money that are a common wealth, and also so I don't know say, but so not clever, not enough clever to take the opportunity to use well at best of our capacities that resources. So the wastes, I think that we are so used to waste our mobile, to use so short time our things, the mobile, wherever we can use. We have so frequent need to change our things due to a reactive approach to the things, because of this tendency of wasting everything.
Well, let me respond, because I think I understand that they're very big questions here, and they're the right questions to ask at this point, if I may. All right. So yeah, I'll give you a classic example of some of the problems at stake, because it's, as I said, the whole damn playbook we have for the modern age. It's what's taken us to the crisis. I'll give you an example. So what happened? Why is it that we have not learned to adapt to a water planet and still think we're on a land planet? There's gender issues here. I'll give you a classic example of where ethics comes in. If you bring the question of water up, it really shows the gender differences. The world's hydraulic civilization has all been a male-oriented operation, all right? But men see water as a resource in the industry. Women see the water as a life source. It's totally different. So as you begin to see these gender issues coming around, the World Bank's dealing with it, the UN, women are taking a bigger play now, saying, look, it's a life source. It's our life source. The male gender, it's our resource. They got to start to come together, all right, in some interesting ways. You talked about ethics. here's the problem in the Western civilization. The East has its own problems. It starts with the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, as you know, Adam and Eve are in the garden. The Lord says, I give you paradise, don't eat the apple. So they blame the woman always and say, Eve ate the apple. So God kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden and says, you will have to live by your toil and all your ancestors, everybody after you. But I will give you a benefit. The Lord said to Adam, I will give you dominion over all of my creation. You shall be the masters of the planet. That caveat in all of its various distinctions across Western civilization, play all the way to the Enlightenment, the Age of Progress, is what's taken us to where we are. Now, the Eastern religions, in theory, they all believe, if you look at Taoism and Shintoism and Confucianism and Buddhism and Hindu, you look at all of those religions and philosophies, they always said humans are simply nature and are always harmonizing with the natural world. We're not apart from nature, we simply are nature. Have they strayed in the East? Absolutely. But at least it's in the cultural DNA. To our credit in the West, it was Europeans who created, if you will, the whole idea of ecological science. It was Europeans that gave us discovery of thermodynamics, which tells us how ethics ought to operate. It's America that brought us the great national parks to preserve nature. It was Silent Spring, the book that tipped us into Earth Day. It was the political parties of the Green Movement in Europe that started to create new stories. So East and West are beginning to come together on a new approach to ethics. It's a long story, but basically ethics relies on how well we can engage the empathic impulse in our neural circuitry. Again, Italian scientists who discovered mirror neurons, the empathy neurons. It's a big struggle. When you take a look at history, there was a quote by George Friedrich Hegel, the great German philosopher, and I heard this quote about 40, 50 years ago, and it kept with me all the time. And I kept wondering, what does this mean? And here's what George Friedrich Hegel said. Happiness are the blank pages of history because they are the periods of harmony. Everybody hear that? Happiness are the blank pages of history. They're the periods of harmony. What did he mean? I finally figured it out. It took a long time. If you read historians and you look at how they look at history, it's all the major tragedies or the huge moments where there was some critical change. It could have been an earthquake, or it could have been the demise of a civilization, or it could be the collapse of a particular region, because those moments are rare, but they get our attention because they're so stark. And so when you start to see history as all of the excruciating events that happen, you get a pretty bad picture. So happiness are the blank pages of history. Empathy, sometimes it expands, and sometimes it collapses into chaos and more fighting. We are on the cusp now of what these young people see as biophilia consciousness. E.O. Wilson, the great Harvard biologist who passed away, did a book on it. We now know that what E.O. Wilson and others have discovered is that there are two important parts of a human being that we get at birth. And that is, one is empathy in our neural circuitry. That's unique. We think a few other creatures have it. And the second thing we get at birth is the attachment behavior to an adult, because we're not mature at birth. Many other animals, mammals, they're much more mature at birth. We're totally not mature. So there's a longer period of attachment to our caregivers, which means that it allows us to use this brain in totally different ways. So again, when you mentioned ethics, it isn't just here's a study. It's how do we rethink behavior? For example, I won't go into it in detail today, but the modern view of ethics was a great struggle between Emmanuel Kant and Arthur Schopenhauer. These two guys were the two different approaches to the future. Emmanuel Kant and Schopenhauer. So Edmund Burke did a little philosophical track way back then. And it was very interesting because it was all called the sublime. And the sublime is this, and this is ethics. It means that in a moment when you are exposed to a major event that's overwhelming, it could be a typhoon or a tsunami or a volcano collapsing or any number of events of nature or a wildfire. And all of a sudden, you are shocked by how overwhelming the power of the planet is. So Edmund Burke said, when that happens, if you are safely away from danger, you might be terrified, but you also are in awe. Holy cow, this planet is much bigger than I thought. Look what's happening. The volcanic ash or the flood or whatever. So you're safe enough away and you say, wow, this is amazing. You have awe. Awe leads to wonder. What the hell is this all about? Existence. Wonder leads to imagination. So how does this get my thinking going about this place I live in? Imagination then can go in two directions. Kant said, well, once you get to that stage of imagination, you have to realize that the human brain, reason, rationality is much more powerful than nature. And we can then take what we're learning and we can then take that event that is overwhelming us and control it, pacify it through rational detachment. Arthur Schopenhauer said, that's ridiculous. It doesn't work in the long run. Schopenhauer said, when you get to that point of terror, then awe, then wonder, then imagination, it can go another way, which is you begin to see, wow, I'm really thinking about what this existence is all about. I'm wondering about life. I'm trying to imagine, how do I fit into this bigger scheme of things? And that can lead to an understanding that I'm part of something much bigger than myself, but I'm part of the agencies of a living, animated, incredible planet that's changing moment to moment, and we are all one. Goethe, the great anti-Enlightenment philosopher, got it right. So what I'm saying is, let's build these kinds of ideas into our curriculum. You're so right, what you've just said. So we have our folks in philosophy and ethics and anthropology. All those departments have to get together with our engineers, our scientists, etc. Your second question, it's all about thermodynamics. You were talking about circularity. The economics profession, I graduated from the Wharton School in the 60s. I taught the advanced management program for 15 years, our corporate program. And I got to tell you, economics is fairly moribund because they do not realize that the basic laws governing economic activity and all activity are the first and second laws of thermodynamics. Why do I say this? When a business, and a lot of these business leaders I've taught, when a business conducts its activity, it only cares about the moment where it's extracting from nature, then repositioning, reproducing, and then transforming the product or service. After that, it's not their concern. The problem is externalities. And that is everything we do ripples out, no matter how small the event, whether you're a company, an industry, or government, and it affects everything else on the planet. It's called the butterfly effect. You know, the scientists have said when a butterfly flaps its wings, then 2 weeks later, there's a tornado at a certain place. That butterfly flapping its wing had an impact. Other scientists through history have understood this. So when we begin to understand that every single thing that we do and all of our fellow creatures actually has an imprint that stays on forever and affects everything that goes beyond us, we begin to take greater responsibility. We began to understand that we are part of something that's really incredible, that's changing in all sorts of ways, and we're part of the players, but we're not the dominators. These are the kinds of things we have to bring through academia. But these are the things you will want to bring into your discussions, really, as you bring your urban mayors together, you bring your presidents of your regions together, you bring your cooperatives and unions together over these next year, and you begin to have these really important conversations that will give you the feeling that, yeah, we're something, part of something bigger, and we can make a difference instead of being frightened.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you Jeremy for these very inspiring explanations. C'è qualche altra domanda? Prego, prego.
Please. Can you introduce yourself, please?
So you talked a lot about universities and their importance. So I am a recent graduate. I graduated in law in July. And I have to be honest, I feel like I have climate anxiety. And I had a lot of moments where I realized, like, as a young graduate, I have no future. So my question is more like a human question. So I would like to ask you, what advice would you give recent graduates like me on managing stress, anxiety related to climate change while trying to make a positive impact in the environmental world? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. The most important thing is to be engaged where you live, where you work, in your community. That is the empowerment. What we've learned about climate change is not only does it affect whole ecosystems, so you have to share across political boundaries and bioregional governments, but it's too big for just government alone. It's too big. And one of the things in the Age of Resilience book I mentioned is we need to begin, we have citizens science. There are thousands of groups all over the world. You can look on citizen science groups where citizens come out, they get engaged with nature. They have guides, from the various disciplines. They become more comfortable with their fellow creatures instead of sitting behind a screen where they get more frightened and removed. So there are citizen science organizations all over the world. Just look it up. But also there are citizens juries now, which is very interesting. You may know that in Porto Alegre years ago, they came up with a new law. This was in South America, where you had to have participatory budgeting, where citizens across the city would be engaged with the government and provide ideas across all their various interests that would then be put into their budgeting process. And this is happening now. Cities are doing it around the world, but not big enough. In my country, we have something called juries, citizens juries. Thousands of people are called up to do duty every year, thousands. And they pick 12 people randomly in the public, and they have to sit on criminal trials or on financial trials that are very complex. And those juries have to have a unanimous verdict if the person's guilty or let them free. What we've learned on all these years, when people say, well, this can't be done, people are too stupid, no, you need experts, it actually works. 9 times out of 10, these juries of just average human beings, when they are given the facts and the information, can work together on either criminal cases or economic cases and come up with good results. The key is to get involved in the local community on how to develop a bioregional approach to preparation, rescue, restoration, adaptation, and changing the way you relate to what the ecosystem is telling you, what the hydrosphere is telling you. You be engaged with others. I believe bioregional governance is where we're heading. Nation states aren't going to disappear overnight, nor are municipalities or any of that, but they have to extend, because these climate events are too big for just a local city to handle by themselves. You need the public. And what we find in these engagements, that the commons actually prevails. When there's a climate event, everybody comes out. The high school kids, the universities, the parents, the civil society. And I've seen so many times with these climate events, people will go and rescue people from a house on fire, from a wildfire. Or they'll go out and not even think about it and save somebody who's being swept away by the currents. This is happening all over the world. It now needs to be more organized, so that in a civil society, we create this concept of bioregional governance, of citizens' juries, of people being educated to the ability to be able to take hold of their regions. That's how you get away from anxiety. The way to get rid of anxiety is to be engaged directly in stewarding that local eco-region and bringing in your friends, your family, your neighbors, and working with local government and extend to bioregional governance. And it's empowering. I don't know if we're going to succeed. But I would say this. My gut, after a lot of time in this, is it's possible we will continue on this planet. But it's going to require a completely different narrative on how we live and where we live and how we approach life. There's going to be a lot of migration. There's going to be a lot of movement to other regions of the world. There's going to be a lot of things going on in the next 20 years. But go from fear to engagement. And there's nothing more engaging than empathizing with your fellow human beings together and our fellow creatures who shouldn't have to be able to be in this extinction event either. All right? Engagement is what works. Jane Goodall's got it right. She's my old friend of mine. We chat once in a while. Get out there and become engaged. Does that help at all?
Thank you.
I hope that's helpful.
Ringraziamo tutti perché abbiamo fatto l'ora indicata.
We'd like to thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite Councillor for the final conclusions. I would like to thank you very much. Obviously, all of the participants, you will be receiving through your email all of the various documents that we mentioned, and we promise that we will send it out to you on Monday. So please have a wonderful weekend with your families. And so I know that you're going back a long way. You have so enjoy this weekend in Milan, which is a bit rainy at the moment, but as I always say, above the clouds, there's always the sun. So goodbye and thank you very much.
Semplicemente grazie a tutte e tutti e thanks. Forward to seeing you in Milan in the near future.
Grazie a tutti. Alla prossima.
Comunque interessante. Sì,